Connor McDavid is one singular point away from breaking 1,000 for his already legendary NHL career. Today's episode, we pay tribute to the best in the game today.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Thursday edition of Locked On Oilers. I am your host, Nick Zararis. I want to thank everyone who's making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's show is brought to you by FanDuel, where you can start the season with a big return. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So today's show, we are going to take a full 30 minutes, and we are going to appreciate just how good Connor McDavid is at hockey. We're going to do that in a few different ways. First, we're going to talk about the aspects of his game that you know about, but we're just going to illustrate them from a statistical perspective. And we're not talking goals and assists. We all know what those are. We're talking his raw skating speed, his transition ability, the stuff that truly makes him what he is, the best player in the world. Our second segment, we'll talk about him and we'll compare him to his favorite player growing up, the best player of the previous era, Sidney Crosby. And then in our final segment, we will tie a bow on this by talking about McDavid's legacy in the context of the great Canadian player, the best player in the world, and how far can he really take this mantle? How far can he take the best player in the world? So at the outset, I know everybody who has ever seen a Connor McDavid highlight kind of has that reaction where they're so taken aback by how impressive it is. You know, there are very few athletes in the history of sports who stand out as being that much better than the people they're in the competition against. You know, you think about the anecdotes about Bo Jackson in the 80s and 90s, Dion in the late 90s, Barry Bonds in the late 90s, early 2000s, where they make a professional sport look so much easier. And it's not just that they are good at it, it is the effortlessness in which they are able to execute these remarkable plays. And I've told this anecdote on the show before, but I'll repeat it again. I have a lot of friends who are casual hockey fans. They check in with the Rangers, the Devils, the Islanders. Once every few weeks, they'll watch a game. Or if we go to a game, they'll want to go if we can see McDavid, if we can see Crosby, you know, if we can see somebody special, because they understand the novelty of it. And the first time I took a few of them to go see the Oilers play the Devils a few years ago, instantly, first shift of the game, my friend Chris taps me on the arm and he goes, I see what you mean about McDavid, because the fluidity and the effortlessness in which he's able to play the game at such a high level, it jumps out to even the untrained eye, to somebody who doesn't understand technique, who doesn't understand strategy or schematics. They can see how good he is at making these plays. They see how effortlessly he's able to go from a dead stop to full speed in 3.5 strides. They see how quick he's able to process the game. And for me, as somebody who has always fancied themselves a quick thinker, who's pretty intuitive in figuring things out, that's always what's compelled me about the great players in sport, regardless of the sport, is how quickly they process the situation, because it's not a conscious action. And it sounds weird to say that it becomes involuntary, that their body inherently knows what they need to do in that situation. But that's the only way you can describe it, because you can't tell me these split-second decisions are happening as a product of conscious thought, you know? And when you draw that comparison, where you make it where McDavid plays hockey the way the rest of us breathe, because breathing is an involuntary action, you can't control whether or not you're going to breathe. Yes, you can actively go, but your body, even once you pass out from holding your breath, is going to start breathing again. It's involuntary. And you can't tell me that it is a conscious thought in McDavid's head when he recovers a puck, looks up and says, well, I can skate, I can move. He just does it. He knows what he needs to do before the play unfolds, frankly. And that's another component of what makes him so dangerous as a player and what makes him so special is not only does he process the game so quickly, not only does he move so quickly, he has an innate understanding of positioning because he is so dangerous. He opens up lanes. And I've said this 1,000 times on the show since I started doing it back in April. Make fun of Zach Hyman for being a tap-in merchant, for Draisaitl shooting from the bottom of the circle. The Oilers and hockey at large benefit from this type of play. When you have a player that is so innately dominant that hockey is in part of who they are, and not just like socially or culturally, but physically, physiologically, that McDavid is able to process the game so quickly that he is able to see sight lines and passing lanes that not other players can identify. And McDavid has the means, the physical ability to get that puck from point A to point B. And now some stats to illustrate that for you. I went and looked. These are from the NHL Edge website, which tracks the player data. And this is in the shoulder pads. There's a little chip in every NHL player's shoulder pads that monitor this. McDavid is 93rd percentile in top speed. He is 99th percentile in speed bursts over 22 miles per hour. He is 98th percentile in bursts between 20 and 22 miles and a half per hour. And he is 78th percentile in speed bursts between 18 and 20 miles per hour to illustrate how fast he operates pretty much at all times. He is also 99th percentile in offensive zone time. The component of McDavid's game that I am making it my life's mission to get this conversation, this part of the game, into casual conversation, because to me, it is what separates the good from the great players, and that's transition play. Transition play, to me, is the most under-discussed component of hockey in 2024, and it's a product of the game evolving very rapidly. You know, we did not have players of this ability. And you're going to say, well, Nick, you weren't alive for Gretzky. I was alive. I did not watch Wayne Gretzky play professional hockey. You'll say, well, Nick, you don't remember Mario Lemieux. Correct. I don't remember watching Mario Lemieux as a kid because I was born in 1997. So I definitely watched Mario Lemieux play a Penguins game or two in like 2003, but I did not retain it. So with that in mind, what I mean by that, the game is so fast. The average player is getting smaller and smaller, so there is more room on the ice to make plays. The great skaters, the great puck handlers, those are the guys who separate themselves. And to illustrate that, I have transition stats from last season because we haven't played enough games for those numbers to stabilize yet. Last year, McDavid was 4th in the league in carry-in percentage of qualified skaters. The only players who carried the puck in at a higher rate, Nathan MacKinnon, Jack Hughes, and Braden Point, Point was a little surprising to see, but MacKinnon and Hughes make sense. McDavid had the second highest ratios of zone entries to entries that lead to a scoring chance. The only player more last season, Jack Hughes of the Devils. So when I say zone entries with possession, that means McDavid has the puck in the defensive zone or the neutral zone. He skates into the offensive zone with speed, and then the play develops. There are not a lot of players in the world who have that level of skating and that level of instinct to be able to create that consistently. It's hard to do. Zone entry work and transition play in general, it's effort. And some teams are better at facilitating this than others. They're able to move the puck a little bit cleaner. They're able to find ways to incorporate different components of their offense. But I want people to get an understanding of just how difficult it is to do what the Oilers do. And the fact that McDavid makes it look so easy, it loses a little bit of its juice. You know, the fact that McDavid makes it look so unbelievably easy, it makes you lose touch with how hard it is to play this way, to do what McDavid does. But he's so good at it, it's almost effortless. So we're going to take our first break here on the Connor McDavid Power Hour. And when we come back, we're going to compare him to his favorite player growing up and his closest contemporary from the previous era, Sidney Crosby, right after this. Get ready to tackle NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. the FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. When you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. Thursday Night Football, Jaden Daniels and the Commanders versus Jalen Hurts and the Eagles. The Eagles are 3.5-point home favorites. Old school AFC North, Ravens, Steelers, the Ravens heading to the Ravens heading to Pittsburgh on Sunday afternoon. And then, of course, rematch of one of the great playoff games of all time, the Chiefs heading to Buffalo to take on the Bills, where the Bills are 2.5-point home favorites. You can get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. Today's show is also brought to you by SelectQuote. The World Series, Super Bowl, Olympics. The world's top athletes get to play in these top-level sporting events thanks to one thing: teamwork. Teamwork can also protect your financial legacy and your family's future. SelectQuote's licensed insurance agents are the perfect teammates when shopping for customized, affordable life insurance. They can find you the right policy to keep your financial legacy stable in the end zone. SelectQuote is one of America's leading insurance brokers with nearly 40 years of experience, helping over 2 million customers find over $700 billion in coverage since 1985. You invest so much time to take care of yourself and to be the healthiest, best version of you. SelectQuote's exclusive policies can reward that effort. If you are in good health, they work with carriers that can get you same-day coverage for up to $5 million, no medical exam required. Head to SelectQuote.com and a licensed insurance agent will call you right away with the right policy for your life and your budget. Get the right life insurance for you for less at SelectQuote.com/LockedOnNHL. Go to SelectQuote.com/LockedOnNHL today to get started. SelectQuote.com/LockedOnNHL. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Thursday edition of Locked On Oilers as we are powering our way through the week, as the Oilers are slowly stabilizing. I don't want to say they are entirely out of the woods. As I said after the win against the Islanders in overtime, didn't feel particularly good about that game, and the fact that you had to go to overtime against an Islanders team that's not very good. It's not a great reflection of the way the Oilers are playing. Yes, they ultimately picked up the win. Yes, Draisaitl and McDavid combined for 6 points in the game. But if you need your two best players to go Super Saiyan against bad teams like the Islanders just to eke out overtime wins, that's not a great reflection of the state of your team. But we will talk more about that tomorrow after their next game against Nashville. For now, I want to talk about McDavid in the context of the great Canadian player. I find this idea really interesting, and I find the savior within sport a fascinating concept because it's got ties to other cultural signifiers. And the most obvious ones, LeBron to Cleveland in 2004, Crosby to the Penguins, who maybe were going to move, Bryce Harper to the Nationals. The idea of the chosen one, Bedard to the Blackhawks in more recent times. The chosen savior has a really interesting connotation culturally, because as much as the world, or I should say the Western world, is moving away from religion, we treat sports like religion, at least the crazies like me do, where there's the idea that if you pay your penance, you make those sacrifices, eventually you'll be rewarded. That's the entire notion of a draft lottery, of a draft system that rewards the worst team. The idea is you be bad, you take your medicine, and in a year or two, you'll get a great player for it. For sacrificing your time, for sacrificing your effort, you will eventually be rewarded. Then, every once in a great while, you have a player who is genuinely franchise altering, who is so unbelievably good that he is able to fundamentally alter the DNA of your organization and change the culture. And it does not happen overnight. When you look at the long lineage of the great player, and we'll focus specifically in on hockey, because hockey's different, because Canada has 7 teams, and the role of hockey in Canadian culture it's such an important signifier. It's such an important touchstone that the great Canadian player assuming that mantle, you went from Gretzky who didn't entirely pass it to Lemieux because they were contemporaries. They played at the same time. But Lemieux definitely towards the end. You go a little while, you have your lockout, and you come out of that lockout, and you have Sidney Crosby, the golden boy. You have the most obvious slam dunk, this is the next guy imaginable coming out of the most embarrassing thing a league could have. You have an entire season canceled because your owners were too greedy to pay the players what they were worth. And it took a salary cap to get the owners to come back to the table. And Crosby goes on to have the greatest career of the 21st century. And there will be people who argue with me about, well, Crosby's not better than Lemieux. That's not what I'm arguing. Of the players to start careers in the 21st century, Crosby is the most decorated and accomplished. The individual awards, the gold medals in the Olympics and the World Cup of Hockey, the 3 Stanley Cups. There's an expression that comes from New York sports media. There was a radio host who was on WFAN, the sports talk station here forever, 35 something years. And he always used to say he was so good he'd get into the Hall of Fame on roller skates, meaning that even if he was a bozo, he would get in. It would be that easy for him. And Crosby's got the best career so far. Now, McDavid is a more physically gifted player, in my opinion. I think Sid has always thrived on his ability to read the game and identify the game. But what separates Crosby from McDavid is McDavid's raw skating speed. And look, Sid was a great skater early on in his career, but after the concussions, he kind of changed the way he liked to attack. He changed some of the components of his game. He got a little bit physically bigger. He got a little bit thicker, so he's able to absorb some contact, to be able to use leverage to win more puck battles as opposed to speed. And he's had 2 great primes, frankly. You know, if you split Crosby's career in half from his draft year to 2014 and then 2014 to the present, you've got one of the great two of the great careers of all time. And McDavid has always lived with that on his mind. You know, I told an anecdote that I read during the Stanley Cup final that when McDavid was 4 or 5 years old, he had asked his parents to help write a letter to Sidney Crosby to ask Crosby how he deals with expectations and responsibility. And Crosby was, I think, 13 or 14 years old, something like that. And McDavid was all of 5 years old. And McDavid sees himself in that vein. He sees himself in that vein as the next great, the great Canadian hockey player. And that's an important cultural responsibility. And McDavid has usurped Crosby's production. And the one thing I want to say before we end this segment, the counting stats between Crosby and McDavid are never going to look as right or as even as they probably would if they played in comparable eras. You got to remember that the NHL pre 2014, there was a lot less room. The players were bigger. They were slower. There were fewer penalties called. It was harder to score. And over time, through rules changes and just the priorities of organizations, the game has gotten a lot faster. There's a lot more room, and McDavid has been able to thrive in that environment. For his 82-game career average, McDavid averages 42 goals, 82 assists in 21.40 per game for his career in an 82-game season. Crosby averages 39.5 goals, 72 assists in an 82-game season. The goals, pretty close. And then McDavid averages about 10 more assists per season. I think that's partly due to the fact that we just have a more offense-friendly environment now. I imagine that in McDavid's career, because he's not that old, he's only 27, that we will see that come back around where we will see a re-emphasis on defense just because of the nature of sports. We're watching that happen in real time in professional football right now, down in here in the NFL, where defenses are really forcing quarterbacks to work for it. You know, I saw a crazy stat that Josh Allen right now, who relatively in the MVP conversation would have the 11th most passing yards in 2016 or 2015. I forget which season it was, behind guys like Eli Manning and Phillip Rivers, who, as good as they were their respective careers, nowhere near as physically talented as Josh Allen. So we're going to take our second and final break of today's show. And when we come back, we're going to talk just how far McDavid can take this, coming up next. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at PrizePicks. You can win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks. PrizePicks is the best place to get real money sports action. Join over 10 million users and sign up today. PrizePicks puts their members first, so all withdrawals are fast, safe, and secure. When my picks hit, I can get my money in as quick as 15 minutes. Sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It is guaranteed. You could do whether or not Connor McDavid's going to have more than half a goal tonight against the Predators, if Leon Draisaitl is going to have more than 1.5 points, or if Evan Bouchard's going to have more than 4.5 shots on goal. Download the PrizePicks app and use code LOCKEDONNHL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Remember, download the app, use code LOCKEDONNHL, and get $50 instantly after you play your first lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. Thank you to everyone who is having fun hanging out here on this Thursday edition of Locked On Oilers, where we are paying tribute to the great Connor McDavid. And one thing that has really sunk into me over time, and I've been doing sports content now for a while. My first day of college in 2015 was when I first started doing sports media stuff. I started writing for the student newspaper then. I've done blogs. I've obviously done podcasts. I've done a lot of different content over the years about hockey, about sports at large. You know, I still love football. I still love baseball. I love soccer. But one thing that has really sunk in and I've really grown an appreciation for is how hard it is to be good at something, how difficult it is to maintain a level of greatness, and how hard it is to refine it and to maintain the discipline to keep that talent. You know, I like to think I'm reasonably good at podcasting. I'm reasonably good at writing. I think I'm an insightful person, but I think about all the work that goes into that, the reading, the watching, the grinding. And we're just talking about an intellectual pursuit here of rewatching hockey games, analyzing statistics, reading columns, listening to other people, and then trying to deduce my own conclusions based on all of those different sources. And I struggle at times to maintain a level head, to not let my emotions get involved, to try and find what really matters. And for a professional athlete to maintain a mindset of I'm going to be the best in the world from 4 or 5 years old through an entire professional hockey career is something that is really unique. You know, as much as McDavid gets maligned for his lack of personality, his lack of color and candor, this is the best hockey player a lot of people are ever going to see. Look, he's probably, I'm going to go out on a limb and say he's not catching Gretzky for points. He's probably not. Could he break the Oilers record for points? That's a little more feasible. I think that's not entirely out of the question, depending on how long he wants to play. But at a certain point, we got to be realistic here. Right now, Connor McDavid sits at 340 career goals. He needs another 243 to catch Wayne Gretzky. Can McDavid score another 243 goals? Yeah, definitely. I think that's within reason. If he doesn't leave and he averages 25 goals a season, and we've said his career average so far is 41, that's within reason. Gretzky's points as an Oiler, 1669. McDavid's going to break 1,000 at some point in the next few days. 700 points. I know that's rounding up. 671 points. That's a lot of points. Is McDavid really going to average 124 points through his early to mid 30s? It's not impossible, but I don't think it's particularly likely. At a certain point, we have to be realistic. And I want to say, I think looking at the stats, you know, Gretzky's got 2,800 career points. That's never happening again. No player ever is having a 2,800 point career unless we start seeing players really push for 160, 170 points consistently. I don't think we're getting there because I do think the elements of hockey, the traditional elements, will linger. I think you see it in the receptiveness to getting rid of fighting from the stakeholders. That's not happening. They want fighting in the game. I think you will always see cyclical natures in the styles of play. I think we'll see teams try and mitigate this offensive boom by focusing on quality defenders when they draft. But as far as how far McDavid can take this, the franchise records are doable. McDavid can absolutely break Gretzky's franchise records for goals, points, and assists. That is not impossible. Knock on wood, and I'm doing that right now. McDavid has largely avoided the pitfalls of injury and strife. I know he lost 40-ish games his rookie season to the broken collarbone. I know he lost about 15 games to the pandemic in 2019-2020, and he lost about 26 games to the pandemic in the shortened season following in 2021. He has been a relatively healthy player. His style of play allows him to avoid significant injury. The franchise records are quite doable, but of course, we all know the elephant in the room. McDavid needs the team accomplishments. The individual resume is as good as it's going to get, especially now that the NHL players are going to start going back to the Olympics. I think we all assume and know Canada will be the favorite at the Olympics in 2 years, in 2026 in Turin. I think we all know that McDavid wants to be on the team and he wants to play with Sidney Crosby. I think they all understand that that's probably going to be Sidney Crosby's last season of professional hockey. He has lined up his contract to expire after that season. I think there is a strong case to be argued that that'll be Sidney Crosby's last dance, that Canada is going to try and win the gold medal for Sidney Crosby. And what that would mean for McDavid and McKinnon, two guys who grew up idolizing Sid, who still idolize Sid even as his contemporary. And then it becomes simple. Can McDavid bring a Stanley Cup back to Edmonton? He has all of the talent in the world. The organization has not made it easy. There will be further turmoil within the organization in the not so distant future. We did a whole episode, I think it was 2 weeks ago or maybe last week, where we talked about why it was so difficult to consistently be a contender. It really is difficult. The Oilers are in a good position for the immediate future, as in right now. A year or two down the road, we are likely talking about significant roster overhaul where at least maybe 7 or 8 of the 18 skaters are no longer on the team. McDavid has everything in front of him. McDavid realistically could probably play another 10 years and it wouldn't shock me. McDavid could probably play another 15 years and it wouldn't shock me. It is simply a matter of what his goals are. If he's going to keep playing till he wins a cup, and I hope he does, it could be a while. That is the nature of sport. Appreciate greatness like this while you have it. It takes a lot of luck to just have it in the building. To refine it and to polish it and to get it to this level, that's another step. Now it's a matter of lining up everything around him. Before we get out of here, thank you for making Locked On Oilers your first listen of the day. Now, head on over and check out Locked On Fantasy Hockey, where you can become a fantasy expert and get the edge over your league mates with daily tips from Steal and Flip. Find Locked On Fantasy Hockey on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Subscribe to Locked On Oilers. Give the show 5 stars if you're on Apple or Spotify. If you're watching over on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. Let me know, how close does McDavid get to the all-time records league-wide, not just Oilers-wide? I will talk to you guys tomorrow after the game against Nashville. Until then, let's go Oilers.